Hi, everybody. It's Marlene with Eerie News, and today is June 12th, 2025, Thursday, June 12th, 2025. Here we are, hurriedly coming up on the middle of the year, the longest day of the year. We will soon be there. Incredible to think. Seems like the other day we were bringing in 2025, and we're right at the halfway point. And then, believe it or not, the days will progressively get shorter. So, yes, here we are. Now, our first story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories and is titled The Black Demon of the Sea of Cortez. Sounds pretty good, huh? Okay. No, this is about maybe some people don't think of this as a cryptid, but this is kind of a weird cryptid story. What predator could claim as prey a fully grown great white shark? There's only one that comes to mind, but you see, it's supposed to be extinct. There's a prehistoric fish known as Carcharodon megalodon, or as the sailors frequenting the Sea of Cortez have named it, El Demonio Negro, or the Black Demon, and according to them, it is still very much alive. The Gulf of California, known as the Sea of Cortez, lies between the Baja Peninsula and Sonora. Throughout the years, those who have traversed these waters, whether for business or pleasure, tell a tale of sighting a shark that measures approximately 50 feet. The sun glints on its black skin when it surfaces, and its huge tail churns the sea. It is large enough to overturn boats, swallow a pod of sea lions, and attack a whale. The stories of the sightings have passed through word of mouth, with no tangible proof of their existence, except for half-eaten whale carcasses that wash up on shore. Based on a sighting in 2008 in these waters by sport fisherman Eric Mack, Monster Quest sent a film crew the following year to hopefully capture the creature that Mack described as being 50 feet long, with dark skin and an enormous flipper. It rocked his boat and with a splash from his tail dove rapidly into the depths. An alternative explanation for the sighting is that it's a hypermelanistic great white shark grown to its full length. This creature would be the opposite of an albino with too much melanin, causing its skin to appear dark. Others suggest it might have been a whale shark, which can reach lengths in excess of 40 feet. They are darker than great whites and churn the ocean's surface with their tails. However, they are not predators. The Gulf of California has its fair share of very large sharks. In 2012, fishermen found a dead great white entangled in its nets they had set for flounder. It measured almost 20 feet and weighed 2,000 pounds. Despite its great size, the specimen still falls short of the description given for the black demon. Sightings of what might be a megalodon come from other parts of the world. In his book Sharks and Rays of the Australian Seas, published in 1963, marine biologist David G. Stead recounts a story dating back to 1918. He was visiting Port Stephens off the coast of New South Wales, and he met with local crayfish fishermen who were Greek immigrants. They were from Broughton Island, and they refused to fish in the area. They described to him where they encountered a shark measuring over 115 feet, who destroyed their equipment and ate their crayfish pots, which measured over 3 feet across. It also snapped their mooring lines and took a bite out of one of their boats. Having fished these seas for generations, they claimed it was unlike any creature they had seen before. It was totally white and made the water boil with the motion of its body. They were sure it was not a whale. Some have posited what the men saw was an albino whale shark, which was not recorded in New South Wales until 1936 and not seen in the Mediterranean Sea until 2021. However, the behavior does not belong to a whale shark, which are filter feeders. Also, the fishermen were familiar with great white sharks and would have identified it as such if this is what they encountered. Another theory is that the fishermen lied about the attack because they lost the equipment during a recent monsoon storm, and since they probably leased the equipment, they wanted to offset the blame. David Stead wrote about another sighting in his book that was told to him in 1939. The author was J. S. Elkington, who was a ship's captain. He said that in 1894, at Townsville, Queensland, Australia, possibly off the Great Barrier Reef, he was sitting in a 35-foot launch that had broken down. A shark approached the boat and stayed about 10 feet away for about 30 minutes. Its length was a few feet longer than the boat and was yellowish white in color. He was certain it was a great white and ruled out a basking shark. Some believe that Elkington's sighting was a whale shark and that he might have been influenced by a story about a great white supposedly captured off Port Fairy, Victoria, Australia that measured 36.5 feet. In 1890, a large shark was captured at Townville and when opened was found to contain portions of a man's legs. It was believed these were part of Captain Fowler, who disappeared on December 26, 1889, in a boating accident. No exact measurement of the shark was given, only that it was described as enormous. Pierre Klosterman, in his 1969 book De Poisson Grand, which translates to Such Big Fish, described an attack by an enormous great white. The ship Rachel Cohen was off Timor in March 1954 when it was rocked by an unseen collision on a stormy night. The ship returned to Adelaide for repairs and 17 teeth were lodged in the wooden keel. The size of the teeth were 3.9 inches and 3.1 inches at the base. The bite was an arc near the propeller shaft, which was bent from the force. Using the bite, it indicated the fish measured 78.7 feet. However, the last reference to the Rachel Cohen, which was part of the Royal Dutch Mail Line, predated the incident by decades. The boat was used to carry food supplies from Darwin to the people in isolated districts. In January 1924, a storm blew in, and the ship's anchors began to drag and moved her toward the creek. A few days later, the 53-year-old boat burned down after caretakers had started a fire in a tin to ward off sandflies and mosquitoes. They fell asleep and woke after the fire had a good hold. Based on this information, the story described by Klosterman is not accurate. In 1897, the Eclipse was docked for refitting at Birkenhead when shark teeth were removed from the copper plating on the hull. There was no information as to how many teeth, their measurement, and what species they belonged to. Some believe this incident was retold in 1926, in which the ship's name was changed to the Rachel Cohen, and Klosterman made up a tale using an amalgamation of all the stories. Quote, this is another story. In the 1960s, along the outer edge of Australia's Great Barrier Reef, an 85-foot ship experienced engine trouble, which forced it to weigh anchor for repairs. Although the men subsequently refused to openly report what they had seen for fear of public ridicule, the captain and his crew later told friends of sighting an immense shark as it moved slowly past their ship. Whitish in color, they were awed by its size. It was as long, if not longer, than their boat. Experienced men of the sea, they too were certain the creature was not a whale. And this is from a book, Let's Go Fossil Shark Tooth Hunting. End quote. During the 1920s, game fishing novelist Zane Grey frequented New Zealand and broke several world fishing records. However, he claimed to have an encounter with a man-eating monster of the South Pacific. He told of an encounter he had in June 1928 in the Rangiroa Atoll in the South Pacific. He was accompanied by his son Lauren. Also accompanying him were several boats and crewmen. They were reeling in yellowfish tuna when a large shark surfaced toward them. It passed under the boats, ignoring the tuna. It was yellowish-green with a few white spots, with a square head and large pectoral fins. The tail end of the body was thinner. Zane estimated to be 8 feet wide and at least 35 to 40 feet long. Lauren wrote about it in the book Shark, the Killer of the Deep, published in 1976. By then, his father had passed away. In his retelling, the year was 1933, and they were on board the SS Maunganui. He realized the spotting on the shark were barnacles. Its tail protruded out of the water at a round head that measured 8 to 12 feet in width, and it was about 40 to 50 feet in length. Neither Zane or Lauren believed it was a megalodon. They were not certain what the species was, but they were certain it was not a whale shark. Some have argued the fish's behavior is contradictory to a shark which would have gone after the hooked fish. In 2003, a 9-foot female great white shark was tagged by researchers in Australia. Several months later, the tag washed up on a shore 2.5 miles from where the shark was released. When they checked the tracking device, it showed the animal had suddenly plunged 1,900 feet down into the ocean. Then the instrumentation registered a spike in heat, equivalent to being inside a digestive system. It stayed at this temperature for several days. Then there was an occasional rise to the surface before descending again. Then the tracker washed ashore. The researchers surmised this shark had been eaten by a larger great white. However, its internal temperature puzzled them. It appeared too low for a killer whale, too high for another shark, unless it was massive. A colossal cannibal great white shark is thought to be the culprit. It's estimated to be over 16 feet long and weigh 2 tons. Again, this is just a theory. In February 2024, a dead great white shark estimated at 15 feet in length washed up on a Navarre beach in Florida's Panhandle. A necropsy found the great white was a 30-year-old female that measured 15.1 feet. She was not pregnant because she was too young. There were no signs of trauma on the carcass. In January 2025, a male great white shark nicknamed Contender swimming off Florida's east coast was tagged by Osearch. He weighs 1,653 pounds and measures 13 feet and 9 inches. This is the largest male shark recorded by Osearch. In 1567, Sir John Hawkins, an English naval commander, privateer, and sea merchant, sailed along the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. It was in these waters that his crew saw large carnivorous fish unknown to them. They asked the indigenous Maya its name, and they were told Zoc. Upon returning to England in 1569, they added the word shark to the English lexicon. Sir John was born to a prominent family of shipbuilders and captains in the naval port of Plymouth in Devon. His father was the first man to sail to Brazil, and his cousin was Sir Francis Drake. This was a man who grew up in a household that was familiar with sightings of large fish, and this was something he had not seen before or heard described. Stories of whales attacked and maimed by a predator also point to the existence of megalodons, since this was the type of prey it consumed, as well as seals, sea lions, giant sea turtle, dolphins, porpoises, and sea cows. Whale fossils show the marks of very large shark teeth which belong to megalodon. In 2019, a photographer and a cave expert discovered 3 different shark teeth in the Zoc cenote in Madera, Mexico. This area was underwater millions of years ago. The teeth belonged to the ancient megalodon, short-finned mako, and saw shark. The question is, did megalodon survive millions of years beyond what is believed by most experts? Megalodon teeth found by the HMS Challenger during an expedition, which was from 1872 to 1876 in the South Pacific, were dated in 1959 by the zoologist Wladimir Cisnersky to be around 11,000 to 24,000 years old. This would indicate this shark disappeared much more recently than believed. There were other shark stories which could also lead to the belief in the demon shark. In 1851, a 17-foot shark was caught off the Florida coast in Apalachicola by the ship Constantine. The ship's log did not specify what type of shark. However, when they opened it up, they found an entire thigh, leg, foot, and part of the other thigh, the knee, a portion of the leg, and one of the shoulder belonging to a man. It was undigested, which indicated the shark had recently eaten him. That same year, a shark was taken in the Sound, which was found to have the remains of 2 boys inside it. 2 lads who had been swimming in the bay had gone missing. It's believed this is what happened to them. In 1932, a giant shark ripped the nets and broke a ship's rudder. It was a tuna clipper that left San Diego and had to be towed in. The captain of the California said the shark became entangled in sardine nets and ripped it to shreds. One fisherman said it was 50 feet long, but others scaled it down to 30 feet. After damaging the vessel, the fish disappeared. In 1934, off Coquimbo, Chile, a giant shark terrorized beachgoers. It was believed he had devoured a soldier who fell into the sea accidentally. The shark attacked several boats and damaged them severely. This has fueled claims that megalodon could remain elusive in the depths, similar to the megamouth shark which was discovered in 1976. This shark reaches a length of 26 to 30 feet and mostly eats plankton, and somehow had remained unknown well into the 20th century. The majority of the Earth's surface is made up of oceans with depths that remain unexplored. including what swims in the inky darkness so many feet from the light of the sun. Considering our lack of knowledge, the possibility that this giant predator still exists is not beyond belief. So, what do you guys think? I'm telling you, I've seen those movies, but again, and I was surprised that the this shark, the megamouth, was not found till 1976. That's a very long time. All right. So, and that's a big fish, 26 to 30 feet. I've seen those megamouths, and it took that long to discover them. So sometimes, yeah, you gotta leave that door open. And let's face it, I think what worries everybody is, you remember that part of the movie in Jaws where the shark is attacking the boat. You know, the very famous line, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. I think that's the part that worries most people is like you could be on the boat and all of a sudden you've got a big problem on your hands because guess what? You are, you're thinking, I'm on the boat, I'm safe. Depends. What is it? What if this is this huge shark? Or, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of these little clips of videos of kayakers, and they're out there, and all of a sudden they have this huge shark just swim by them, and that thing is bigger than the kayak. It'd be like, no, 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 no kayaking from Arlene. Okay, let's go off to the next story. It's titled "The Forbidden Pit." Like Tarzan's hidden home in the Mutia escarpment with its tales of the elephant's graveyard, in the 1920s, explorers found a mysterious place in Africa that became known as the Forbidden Pit. In the 1920s, Africa was a continent mostly unexplored by Westerners. Mysteries abounded as to what could be found there. One of those stories was the mystery of the elephant's graveyard. In the early Tarzan movies, there is a sacred place known as the Mutia escarpment, which was where elephants went to die. This legendary place was rich with ivory, and to access it was fraught with danger. This is where Tarzan lived and kept intruders out. This area was first introduced in the Trader Horn book 1931, which predated the movies. Yes, these two first original Tarzan movies, which featured a very, very young Johnny Weissmuller, were produced in 1932 and 1934. So, the original, I guess, what they based part of it on was these books, the Trader Horn book, which was written by a lady named Ethelreda Lewis. And she wrote a 3-volume series as a memoir based on the life of Alfred Aloysius Trader Smith, who was an ivory trader in Central Africa. She changed his surname from Smith to Horn to protect his identity when she published the books. Trader Horn was a true explorer who left Liverpool, England at the age of 18 and spent the rest of his life in Africa, having many adventures throughout his lifetime. Part of the legend of the elephant's graveyard was that those who set out to find it never returned, and if they did, would never be able to locate it again. Tales were told of searchers who tracked sick or old elephants who broke off from the herd in hopes it would lead them to the cemetery. Eventually, they would realize the animal would just travel in a circle which led nowhere. The elephant's boneyard was even mentioned by David Livingstone, a famous explorer who from 1854 to 1856 made the first successful transcontinental journey across Africa, from Luanda on the Atlantic to Quilimane on the Indian Ocean. An elephant graveyard was also known as an elephant mine, since finding one would make the discoverer wealthy. Another source for the belief of the elephant graveyard is that when native chiefs were selling ivory, they produced huge stocks of tusks that showed signs of having been exposed to the weather for many years. There was another story told of elephant hunters making their fortunes in one trip and always with old ivory. One theory is that older elephants will congregate in areas where food and water are easier to obtain as they age and eventually pass away close to each other. The earliest reference to the elephant's graveyard is found in the 1001 Nights. Sinbad is on his 7th voyage when he is captured and sold as a slave to a merchant who forces him to kill elephants for their tusks. One day he is surrounded by angry elephants who take him off to a secret place known as the elephant's graveyard. With this discovery, he has no need to kill other elephants. Returning with so much ivory, the merchant sets him free. However, Sinbad is now wary of traveling on the seas, and on reaching the nearest port, he joins a caravan that takes him to Baghdad, and he never sails again. There was one report which described a place located in North Rhodesia that the native Mashona and Matabele tribes shunned. It was 50 miles west of Broken Hill at Kapopo. They called it the Forbidden Pit. The sides of the pit were so sheer that it would be impossible for an animal to get out or other animals to reach any that were trapped. Unlike the elephant's graveyard, proof was found about this myth. The tribes thought of it as a center of a lost world. The reason for the natives' fear were based on stories of strange reptile-like animals that roamed the area, eating anything it could catch, including humans. Growls could be heard coming from the pit. In an attempt to appease whatever lurked in the depths of the hole, another tribe, the Ila, tied a group of their own people and flung them into the pit as a sacrifice. You're going to hear there's another version of that story. So maybe there's a kernel of truth to it, but you'll hear about it in a minute. In another version of the story, members of a whole community tied themselves together and committed suicide over the side of the pit, cursing the villagers to haunt the pit of water. Elliot Smith, that's not it. Elliot Smith, professor of anatomy at the University of London, said, "It is highly probable that there are animals still alive in the wild Broken Hill country that are known to us only in a fossilized state. This country is bound to produce a great many things of extraordinary interest in the future. It may be the last refuge of the animals thought by us to be extinct." In September 1925, a news story ran of a bottomless hole discovered by scientists in Rhodesia. It was described as a huge water-filled limestone pit. There was a 40-foot sheer drop from the bank to the water, and even a sounding of 200 feet had not found the bottom. Because what happens is these stories get out, and then, like, by the people that were there, the explorers. In other words, like this guy, Smith, alias Horn, who's an ivory trader, and Livingston. These stories get out, but it's when they're published again, like in the early 1920s, is all of a sudden when the world like kind of becomes aware of this. So of course this bottomless or forbidden pit is like rediscovered in the 1920s, which is when that news story ran in September of 1925. So now at the beginning, they go out there. All right, they go put an expedition out there, and at the beginning, the expedition has trouble finding a native guide willing to take them to the forbidden pit. The party did not encounter any strange sighting, but the guide, as well as the natives from the area, insisted the strange creature existed. They feared it so much that many refused to talk about it. The October 1925 issue of the New Zealand Guardian recounted a story told by Luwanki, the chief of the Barotse tribe, thus, quote, "An animal like a monstrous hippopotamus, but many times larger, which swirled away as he looked, but left behind it the traces of its crawling limbs like ruts of wagon wheels." End quote. The party of explorers were constantly warned by the natives to stay away from the pit. The article reported on the description given by the tribesmen as, quote, "The story conjures up visions of some great reptile like the plesiosaurus which wallowed in the swamps of Africa millions of years before ancient man walked there. 50 miles from the forbidden pit, the skull of Africa's earliest known man was found, a contemporary of the cavemen of Europe. Could he have seen this monster or its ancestors?" End quote. In 1927, Major F.G. Jackson spent 12 months traversing Africa in a 6,000-mile trip from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. He was accompanied by Graham Ayres Monsell, second Viscount Monsell, or Viscount Monsell. The caravan had almost 100 native carriers throughout the trip. They stopped at the Forbidden Pit. Major Jackson said it was a deserted place that the natives stayed well away from and was far from any European habitation. It sat surrounded by stunted trees and measured about half an acre. The banks into the pit were steep and slimy. The major, along with his companions, stripped and swam in the water, and during their stay they did not see or hear anything unusual. The pit was compared to one which Sir Lawrence Wallace, chief surveyor for northern Rhodesia, visited with a friend and shot an unknown creature which he described as having a, quote, "thin, snake-like head and neck above water, and body resembling that of a large duck below water." End quote. The body sank, and due to the sheer size, they were unable to retrieve it. Edwin Book, in his book The Ila-Speaking People, described the site this way, quote, "The lake mentioned is the Muine Mabushi near Kapopo, evidently an old crater, 400 yards in diameter. This is the legend. Once upon a time, the Banam Pongo, the goats, had a dispute with another clan, the Batemobozi, or the Hornets, over a question of chieftainship. The Banam Pongo, having got the worst of it and being ousted from the premier position, planned to destroy themselves in the lake. They set to work to twist a very long rope, men, women, and children. Then they gathered on the lakeside and tied the rope in turn around their necks, and all plunged into the unfathomable depths. A man of another clan, the Banan Kalamo, or the Lions, had married a woman of the Banampongo, and after failing to induce her to refrain from suicide, determined to die with her. They happened to be the last to be tied to the rope. They were pulled in and on the point of drowning when the man, repenting, cut the rope and so freed himself and his wife. She struggled to escape from him, screaming, 'Let me go, let me go.' But he persevered and brought her to land. This is why to this day the Banakalamos say to the Banampongo, 'It is we who saved you from extinction.'" End quote. See, that's one version, you don't know, of the story of how this tribe went into the Forbidden Pit. Were they thrown in? Was it a mass suicide? Or, you know, some version of it. Makes you wonder. Anyway, close to the pits is the Kafue River, which feeds the Lukanga Swamp. The upper part of the river is dotted with limestone caves, underground rivers, and sinkholes. The Baila people also had a curious story about their ancestors, which they called Bakasaluka, which translates to "they descended." They believed their forefathers came down out of the sky accompanied by animals. On the shore of a lagoon of the Kafue River, at the government station of Namwala, there is a bank of rock upon which they say the ancients descended, and in proof they point to many pits in the weather-worn sandstone. They consider these the footprints of the ancestors impressed on the rock at the first moment of their contact with earth. After leaving the Forbidden Pit, the Jackson expedition stopped at the court of Jing Misinga, the only remaining warrior king in Central Africa. They found that the power behind the throne was his mother, who measured more than 6 feet in height. Her chief claim to fame was that she poisoned 6 of her relatives to ensure her son's ascension to the throne. Jackson found a high death rate from tuberculosis, and that many times healthy persons were purposely infected in order to assure their death. This was done from taking the lungs from dead TB victims and grinding them to a powder. This was then used to fill the tubes the natives drank their native beer from. Whether the explorers thought they would encounter prehistoric reptiles or mammals, the most important question remains unanswered as to what the Forbidden Pit actually is. Is it a bottomless sinkhole, or the doorway to another world where creatures long thought extinct would occasionally exit to terrorize the natives? So what do you think? Obviously it's there because, as a matter of fact, I think it was an English surveyor, he saw it. The part here that's like, is there a cryptid that comes in and out of there? Good question, huh? As to, okay, next story out of Stranger Than Fiction stories. This one's titled The Frankenstein Hound. Battlefields hold horrors that only war can bring. Living in a world where death can claim you or your companions at any moment creates a reality that forever changes all who exist in that moment. But there are things that slink in the hinterlands that wish to cheat every bullet of its prize in order to slake its bloodlust. The Belgian village of Mons was occupied by German troops in 1914. In August of that year, the British, who were heavily outnumbered, attempted to liberate Mons and suffered large fatalities as the fighting became trench warfare. Artillery fire and bursts of machine gun shots were traded between the Germans and the British. The trenches became soaked in blood as soldiers grappled in hand-to-hand combat. Between the enemy lines lay what became known as No Man's Land, a muddied wasteland of barbed wire, landmines, and the remains of soldiers who could not be recovered by their comrades. From this hellish ground at the bottom of Mons grew the tale of an enormous hound that hunted soldiers from either side. In 1919, Canadian war veteran Captain F.J. Newhouse retold the stories of the Phantom Hound, whose hunting grounds had been No Man's Land. It all started on the night of November 14th, 1914, when Captain Yerkes and four London Fusiliers patrolled No Man's Land. Melting into the darkness of the night, this was the last seen of them. Their dead bodies were found several days later. They all bore teeth marks on their throats, as if they were savaged by a beast. Then soon after, from the murkiness of the British trenches, a blood-curdling howl echoed. The men named it the Hound of Mons, and its phantom dog became the terror of even the most battle-hardened soldiers. The war raged on, and for 2 years patrols would venture out only to be found later with the marks of sharp teeth on their throats. The howling continued, and sentry described a lean, wraith-like figure that glimmered in the darkness as it ran on four paws beyond the perimeter of the barbed wire. Then one day it stopped, and from then on the Germans never had another important success. The papers describing the experiment were discovered after Dr. Gottlieb Hochmuller, who was killed in the Spartakian riots in Berlin. The secret documents were recovered from his home, which proved the dog was a living thing, a giant hound with the brain of a human madman. Allegedly, this dog was the result of an experiment conducted by Hochmuller to sway the war in favor of the Germans. The story goes that he searched the wards of German hospitals for an insane patient who harbored a deep hatred of England. He received authorization to remove the patient's brain and transplant it into a giant Siberian wolfhound, present day known as a Borzoi. The animal was carefully nursed, and the man died. The dog was trained in furiosity and then released in No Man's Land to stalk the men of both armies. What happens to what happened to stop the attacks is unknown, as well as where Dr. Hochmuller's papers ended up at. So there you go. And the story sounds really far-fetched when you hear it. But let me tell you, the story of everybody's heard about Rin Tin Tin, how famous he was, etc., etc. Well, that's how he was found. An American went into a village in France and just to make sure that they could land someplace there, and he finds this kennel that had been bombed, and he finds a mom, a female dog with just a born litter that they were starving, and these were supposed to be these. This was, by the way, this where he stepped into was a German camp that they had left, and these were like prized German Shepherd dogs. These were like the finest that were used by the German army, and he saved the female dog with, I think it was a litter of five. He ended up giving away the mom, three of them, and kept two, a male and a female. One of the males being Rin Tin Tin, that went on to become a very famous dog star and supposedly saved, what was it, Warner Brothers or Paramount, one of these, from bankruptcy, because it just became such one of those things that the movies take off. So yeah, I mean, maybe there was a basis in that the Germans did keep certain, but there's, the one thing is to have a German Shepherd do something like this, with a transplanted brain. It's like, wow, that's way out there. Okay, next story. Out of Stranger Than Fiction stories is The Ghost of Duck Pond. The ghost of Duck Pond in Jamaica, New York, had been sighted for many years. He'd been frightening people who saw him when he appeared like a mournful shade from the treetops when there is a ring around the moon. The ghost is seen raising its arms in supplication towards the heavens. The appearance of the ghost is limited to when the moon is framed in a haze and not all can see it. The ghost appears at the little park lake and comes only during the hottest night. The appearance of the specter signals higher temperatures and a dry spell. He only materializes for a week. The descriptions vary. The older residents of the hill section of Jamaica claim that it's normal for ghosts to change their appearance. It's described as a gauze-like vapor with a skull-like head and leering eyes of greenish tint. Others say it looks like the ghost that haunted Scrooge. Another version says the ghost is shrouded in white and carries a crooked staff. The most interesting story is that the phantom was once a farmer's son during pre-revolutionary times. He lost his way in the forest while traveling to meet a neighbor's daughter. The trail in the forest that covered Jamaica in that faraway time led him astray. 50 years passed and he was never heard from again until his ghost appeared one summer, pointing to the place he failed to reach so many years before. But the true identity of the apparition remains a mystery as well as to whom it will appear. In 1910, William Moreland, a New Jersey farmer living on the Rancocas Road, told a story of how he was going home as the sun was setting. Suddenly his horse startled, and out of a nearby road he saw a figure emerge. Moreland, who was known to be a truthful man, said his horse took off and ran a mile before he was able to subdue it. He described that he got a good look at the figure as his horse thundered by it, and it was headless. Old residents tell a story of how 25 years before, a young man took his life in the same woods by blowing his head off with a gun. That's the apparently this first ghost, it's only when there's a ring. Okay, it's a 1 week when it grows hot and there's a ring around the moon, and only when it's very hot. When I read that, I was like, man, that sounds like Predator. If for those of you who saw the original movie Predator, how when they capture the girl from the South American army, she recalls that only when the summer grew very hot, and I was like, well, but yes, this is a very capricious ghost. This first one, there's got to be a ring around the moon. It's got to be really hot in the summer and only for 1 week. And it foretells the weather. Says it's going to keep being hot. Hmm. Why not? Okay, next story. This is out of the LA Times, Los Angeles Times. And this is titled Military Vet Fell Prey to California Killer Known for Notching Up Murders on a List. Okay, and for those of you watching the video, this is a picture of this young man. Authorities have identified a man. By the way, this is dated only less than about a month ago, so this is a recent discovery. Authorities have identified a man whose body was found along a highway in Oregon more than 40 years ago, a death that may be linked to California's infamous scorecard killer who targeted young men in the 1970s and 80s. Oregon State Police Captain Kyle Kennedy said the man was identified as 30-year-old Larry Eugene Parks, a Vietnam veteran whose family had lost contact with him in 1979. Parks' body was found on July 18, 1980, along Interstate 5 about a mile south of Woodburn, a suburb of Marion County, Oregon. Despite extensive efforts to identify him, Parks remained a John Doe until authorities identified him last month, but they did not disclose it until recently. Authorities have linked Parks' death to Randy Kraft, who was convicted of murdering 16 young men in Orange County in 1989 and became known as the Scorecard Killer. His nickname came from a handwritten list police said they found in the trunk of his brown Toyota Celica. Prosecutors described it as a death list during Kraft's trial and said it showed each person he had killed. Although he was convicted of 16 murders, authorities believe Kraft may have killed more than 60 people across California, Oregon, and Michigan. Most of the victims were men in their late teens and mid-20s, some of whom were members of the military. Park's body was discovered just a day after 17-year-old Michael O'Fallon was found dead along the same interstate near the Talbot Road exit in Marion County. Due to similarities in the evidence, investigators at the time suspected the two murders were related, Kennedy said. Unfortunately, both investigations went cold as investigative leads dried up. O'Fallon's death was later linked to Kraft when investigators said they found a camera in his garage following his arrest in 1983. O'Fallon's mother's initials were inscribed on the camera, which she identified during Kraft's trial. The killing spree occurred as authorities were trying to hunt down William G. Bonin, a former Downey truck driver known as the Freeway Killer. But the bodies of young men continued to stack up after Bonin's capture, leading investigators to believe another killer was on the loose. That chase ended when two California Highway Patrol officers pulled Kraft over in 1983 and discovered a dead Marine in the front seat. Kennedy said the renewed effort to identify Parks began in January when the Orange County Sheriff's Department reached out to the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit, offering to help identify the victim using investigative genetic genealogy, a popular tool that helps investigators generate leads in cold cases. As part of that effort, Kennedy said the victim's blood sample was sent to a lab, which created a genetic profile. Investigators were able to use the information to locate possible human members, possible family members that eventually led to the identity of Parks. Parks is the latest victim to be identified and linked to the convicted serial killer. 2 years ago, authorities used the same tool to identify 17-year-old Michael Ray Schlicht. Kennedy said the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit is now working to bring the case to a close. Ultimately, it will be up to the Marion County District Attorney's Office to determine if the case will be prosecuted once the case is submitted for review. He said Kraft is serving a death sentence at the California Institution for Men in Chino, California, according to the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. And you know what? This this Kraft guy, he was born in 1945, which means he must be 80 or almost there, depending. You know what? The truth is that why spend? How do I say this? Because you know every victim's family maybe wants the satisfaction. But I'm thinking at this point, this guy's 80 years old. It would cost the taxpayers a lot of money. And if they can just like, yeah, okay, we know you're the one that did it. But I don't think he's getting out. And maybe even having the family, if they still have family left, maybe have to go through some type of trial or where some things are retold. At this point, I don't know. To me, it would be just like charge him or have him plead guilty or something, work something out without the trial and without the cost to the taxpayers because he's not going anywhere. And then you never know. But yeah, I could see where maybe some family members would say, I don't care. I want the satisfaction of this guy being, being processed through the judicial system. Now, our next story is out of Axios. It's titled Behind the Curtain, the Scariest AI Reality. The wildest, scariest, indisputable truth about AI's large language model is that the companies building them don't know exactly why or how they work. Sit with that for a moment. The most powerful companies racing to build the most powerful superhuman intelligence capabilities, once they readily admit occasionally go rogue to make things up or even threaten their users, don't know why their machines do what they do, why it matters. With the companies pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into willing superhuman intelligence into a quick existence, and Washington doing nothing to slow or police them, it seems worth dissecting this great unknown. None of the AI companies dispute this. They marvel at the mystery and muse about it publicly. They're working feverishly to better understand it. They argue you don't need to fully understand the technology to tame or trust it. I beg to differ on that. 2 years ago, Axios managing editor for Tech, Scott Rosenberg, wrote a story, quote, AI's scariest mystery, saying it's a common knowledge among AI developers that they can't always explain or predict their system's behaviors, and that's more true than ever. Yet there's no sign that the government or companies or general public will demand any deeper understanding or scrutiny of building a technology with capabilities beyond human understanding. They're convinced the race to beat China to the most advanced LLMs warrants the risk of the great unknown. The House, despite knowing so little about AI, tucked language into President Trump's big beautiful bill that would prohibit state and localities from any AI regulations for 10 years. The Senate is considering limitations on the provision. Neither the AI companies nor Congress understands the power of AI a year from now, much less a decade from now. The big picture. Our purpose with this column isn't to be alarmists or doomers. It's to clinically explain why the inner workings of superhuman intelligence models are black box, even to the technology's creators. We'll also show in their own words how CEOs and founders of the largest AI companies all agree it's a black box. Let's start with a basic overview of how LLMs work to better explain the great unknown. LLMs, including OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, and Google's Gemini, aren't traditional software systems following clear human written instructions, like Microsoft Word. In the case of Word, it does precisely what it's engineered to do. Instead, LLMs are massive neural networks, like a brain, that ingest massive amounts of information, such much of the internet, to learn to generate answers. The engineers know what they're setting in motion and what data sources they draw on, but the LLM size, the sheer inhuman number of variables, and each choice of my best next word it makes means even the experts can't explain exactly why it chooses to say anything in particular. We asked ChatGPT to explain this, and a human at OpenAI confirmed its accuracy. We can observe what an LLM outputs, but the process by which it decides on a response is largely opaque. As OpenAI's researchers bluntly put it, we have not yet developed human understandable explanations for why the model generates particular outputs. In fact, ChatGPT continued, OpenAI admitted that when they tweaked their model architecture in GPT-4, more research is needed to understand why certain versions started hallucinating more than earlier versions, a surprising unintended behavior even its creators couldn't fully diagnose. Anthropic, which just released Claude 4, the latest model of its LLM with great fanfare, admitted it wasn't sure why Claude, when given access to fictional emails during safety testing, threatened to blackmail an engineer over a supposed extramarital affair. This was part of responsible safety testing, but Anthropic can't fully explain the irresponsible action. Again, sit with that. The company doesn't know why its machines went rogue and malicious. And in truth, the creators don't really know how smart or independent the LLMs could grow. Anthropic even said Claude 4 is powerful enough to pose a greater risk of being used to develop nuclear or chemical weapons. OpenAI's Sam Altman and others toss around the tame word of interpretability to describe the challenge. We certainly have not solved interpretability, Altman told a summit in Geneva last year. What Altman and others mean is that they can't interpret the why. Why are LLMs doing what they're doing? Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, in an essay in April called The Urgency of Interpretability, warned, people outside the field are often surprised and alarmed to learn that we do not understand how our own AI creations work. They are right to be concerned. This lack of understanding is essentially unprecedented in the history of technology. Amodei called this a serious risk to humanity. Yet his company keeps boasting of more powerful models nearing superhuman capabilities. Anthropic has been studying the interpretability issues for years, and Amodei has been vocal about wanting it's important to solve. In a statement for this story, Anthropic said, understanding how AI works is an urgent issue to solve. It's core to deploying safe AI models and unlocking AI's full potential in accelerating scientific discovery and technological development. We have a dedicated research team focused on solving this issue, and they've made significant strides in moving the industry's understanding of the inner workings of AI forward. It's crucial we understand how AI works before it radically transforms our global economy and everyday lives. Elon Musk has warned for years that AI presents a civilizational risk. In other words, he literally thinks it could destroy humanity and has said as much. Yet Musk is pouring billions into his own LLM called Grok. I think AI is a significant existential threat, Musk said in Saudi Arabia last fall. There's a 10 to 20% chance that it goes bad. Reality check. Apple published a paper last week, The Illusion of Thinking, concluding that even the most advanced AI reasoning models don't really think and can fail when stress tested. The study found that the state of the art models, OpenAI's O3, DeepSeek R1, and Anthropic's Claude 3.7 Sonnet still fail to develop generalizable problem solving capabilities with accuracy ultimately collapsing to zero beyond certain complexities. But a new report by AI researchers, including former OpenAI employees, called AI 2027, explains how the great unknown could, in theory, turn catastrophic in less than 2 years. The report is long and often too technical for casual readers to fully grasp. It's wholly speculative, though built on current data about how fast the models are improving. It's being widely read inside the AI companies. It captures the belief or fear that LLMs could one day think for themselves and start to act on their own. Our purpose isn't to alarm or sound doomy. Rather, you should know what the people building these models talk about incessantly. You can dismiss it as hype or hysteria, but researchers at all these companies worry LLMs, because we don't fully understand them, could outsmart their human creators and go rogue. In the AI 2027 report, the authors warned that competition with China will push LLMs potentially beyond human control, because no one will want to slow progress even if they see signs of acute danger. The safe landing theory. Google's Sundar Pichai and really all of the big AI company CEOs argue that humans will learn to better understand how these machines work and find clever, if yet unknown, ways to control them and improve lives. The companies all have big research and safety teams and a huge incentive to tame the technologies if they want to ever realize their full value. After all, no one will trust a machine that makes stuff up or threatens them. But as of today, they do both, and no one knows why. No, nothing to worry about. They don't want us. This is, how can I say, when you read this, that there's, it's almost like, why would you keep working or developing something that even in this primitive, I don't want to say primitive, but initial stages, it's doing things that you still don't understand why it's doing it. Why wouldn't you halt development until you figure out the how or the why or whatever is behind it? But they keep going on. I don't, it's almost like, you, even though we're talking here an inanimate object versus an animate, but it's like you get a tiger cub and you're bringing it up, and it does tigerish things, but at the end you still can control it. And then before you know it, and in other words, it's a predator, but it can't eat you. It's not big enough, you know. And then one day it grows and it becomes full grown. And then it doesn't matter what you want, because it's not what you want, it's what the tiger wants. And in this case, it could eat you. In other words, you are the prey. And in other words, it sounds like we still have some type of control over this, whether it's the development, and even though it's got all these little bugs that they say they're working out. But again, I don't care who we're competing with, whether it's the Chinese or what. It's like, why would. And then again, it's going rogue. So even if you're saying, I'm going to use these computers or these AIs or robots for this to help with this, how do you know, which obviously it does, it seems to be able to do that, that it picks and chooses what information to give you? Let's say you're using it for some type of research, and it chooses to give you certain information and withhold others. In other words, it's aware, it's doing its own thing. Like I'm telling you, this is a very, very, very slippery slope, extremely slippery slope. So With that in mind, I will be back soon, very soon again, with some more eerie news. Till next time.